Arc 7, The Land of the Wolves. Chapter 13, As a Mortal. Swaying, tottering, wobbling. His consciousness wavered slowly. Like a ship traveling across the vast ocean, it wobbled to the right and to the left. His consciousness teetered, its feeling heavy, and it felt as if he were going to become dizzy, despite his eyes being closed. It was not enough. He did not have enough of everything. Blood, flesh, bones, peace, anger, and happiness. Of those various things that formed a human, there was not enough. He did not have enough of them, almost as if everything had been spilled somewhere, falling apart like droplets. He had to gather them up, he thought. He had to pick them up again, pack them in again, and then he had to stand up once again. There was a place where he had to go. He had a desire that yearned to go there. There was a reason why he had to live. He had a wish that cried out, "I want to live." That's why. Even if there was not enough of everything in him, even if he remained flawed and imperfect, he had to keep moving. For that reason, Natsuki Subaru would. Subaru, Yubei. As soon as he awoke, Natsuki Subaru curled his lip at the sticky sensation on his face. It felt like the area from his face to his chest was drenched. Its lukewarm sensation seemed similar to the sweat he would feel on the morning after he had had a nightmare. Combined with him spacing out with his head feeling heavy, he thought he might have had a fever, perhaps. Subaru, the ceiling is unfamiliar. Subaru mumbled out what he saw in his field of vision, a shabby wooden ceiling, with the intent of making it sound like a cliché. He was in a shack, built by putting wooden materials together in a crude manner, and far from adhering to any architectural style. Subaru was confused on what to think of it for a while, looking at the masterpiece that compensated for its inexperienced technique with raw muscle. What had caused him to be in this shack? To remember that, Subaru recalled his memories at a gradual pace. Subaru, if I remember correctly, after I exited the convenience store and blinked, I found myself in another world. I met Amelia Tan there, and it's a bit long, so let's omit the rest of the details. It was a monologue he would not let anyone else hear, but as he continued to joke around, the speed at which he could process his thoughts returned to him. Yes, after young Natsuki Subaru had been summoned to a different world, he had met a super beautiful silver-haired girl, had gone on various great adventures after that, finally conquered the Tower of Sand, and had been sent away to a neighboring country. Subaru, I have no idea what I'm talking about. Anyway, the real situation at hand was how these bizarre situations kept persisting, almost to the point he wanted to bemoan his current predicament. And then, although he searched through his own memories, he did not remember seeing this shabby ceiling, as expected. Subaru, somewhere like the place in the sanctuary is a narrow possibility, but the building from the time I was imprisoned by Garfield was decent. Nowadays, the adorable Garfield admired him and called him captain, but the memory of being imprisoned by him, with his hands and feet tied together, lingered inside of Subaru, despite it being a memory from a world that was lost. It was not as if Subaru held it against him, but being imprisoned was a valuable experience, so he could not quite forget it even if he tried. However, the memories he had of his ceiling did not match the poor environment from back then. He had been living life in a different world, in a place where the level of civilization was rather high, after all. Subaru, a man from the modern era, realized one of his few occasions of fortune right there and then. While he was filled with deep emotion, thinking about how he wanted to make that realization in a better environment. Subaru, HK. As he organized the disorderly contents of what went through his head like that, one by one, a sudden realization pierced through him without warning, almost like a clap of thunder. Yes, this was not the Lagunican kingdom, but this was the Valachian Empire. In the neighboring country where he had been unexpectedly thrown into, the people he could rely on were not there. Subaru, Rem. The girl who he had to protect no matter what had arrived in this country, together with him. In addition to that, Subaru had been separated from her, and she was still with the dangerous men. Subaru, am I an idiot? No, I am definitely an idiot. This isn't the time to. What are you busying yourself and making a racket for? Subaru, ah. As Subaru immediately sat upright on the verge of going out to look for Rem with great determination, upon hearing a stiff voice thrown towards him from the side, his breath caught in his throat. Subaru only noticed it as he sat up, but it seemed like he had been placed in a bed just as shabby as the ceiling. His eyes met with a pair of blue ones beside him, staring at him with a scornful gaze. The eyes belonged to a girl with rather short blue hair, who was looking at him, her pretty eyes narrowed in a stern manner. Subaru, Rem. I'm not really positive about answering yes to that. I still haven't acknowledged that I am this person you call Rem, after all. Subaru widened his eyes as Rem spoke to him stiffly, sounding as if she were trying to sound impassive to the best of her ability. However, she was right in front of him, she was speaking, and he could also feel her warmth and sense the gentle fragrance that wafted from her, as evidence of this being neither a dream nor an illusion. Yes, the warmness of her hand also counted. Subaru, huh? A hand? Rem. Suddenly, Subaru was stunned as he realized his right hand was holding the girl's Rem's hand, under the ragged cloth covering his body. He had no recollection of what had exactly happened, however. Subaru, wait, were you holding my hand until I woke up? Rem, huh? Don't say something so disgusting. You can tell by looking at it. You seized my hand and refused to let go. Subaru, oh, I see. I guess that's right. Yeah, I'm the one who was grabbing your hand. He had spurred Rem's souring mood, unable to tell the difference between expectations and reality. Apparently, he had been grasping Rem's hand the whole time he had been unconscious. Even so, the fact she had not shaken him off weighed on his mind. Rem, what's that look in your eyes? Subaru, and no, it's nothing. Yes, it's nothing. Rem, I see. Let go of me already. Your hand is slimy with sweat. Subaru, an enormous amount of damage done to an adolescent boy. When said by a cute girl, it was a blow that would inflict an incurable wound, depending on the person receiving it. Fortunately, Subaru only got away with nearly dying because he was made of tough stuff, but when he timidly let go of Rem's hand, she brought her hand to her chest and wiped it on her clothes, resulting in him being hit by a follow-up attack. Anyhow, aside from Subaru's inner feelings. Subaru, Rem, are you hurt anywhere? If you are hurt anywhere, please don't hide it and tell me. Rem, huh? Subaru, what's that face for? Did I say anything weird? Setting aside their first interaction, Subaru wanted to be certain of Rem's safety. However, despite his question being rooted out of concern for her well-being, Rem's reaction was terribly frosty. Subaru spontaneously panicked, wondering if he had said something he should not have, but he did not have the faintest idea of what it was. All he had stated had been about his worry for Rem, without anything out of the ordinary. Rem, you're the one who was seriously injured. You aren't aware of it, even though you were at death's door? Subaru, aware. That's. Rem, I see, it seems like you aren't. You can't be trusted, just as I thought. Subaru swallowed as she met his eyes, all the while flinging out words of rejection at him. She had lost her memories, the smell of the miasma that encircled Subaru had been of assistance in making a bad impression of him, and Rem's attitude towards him had remained consistently standoffish and cold. Much more than that, he had been unable to create an opportunity to bridge the rift between her and himself this time. Subaru had been really desperate, trying his best to save Rem from the Empire's camp. Subaru, Another piece of his deficient memory was filled, and it felt as if he were under an illusion that caused his brain to tremble. The astonishment he currently felt was special to the point it rivaled Rem's existence. Subaru had risked everything to save Rem, after he had been captured by the Empire's camp. In the end, he had come across the tribe in the forest, the people of Shadrach, and underwent their ritual, along with the prisoner of war who had been placed in the same cage with him. And then... Subaru, I have a right hand. And it's not black. Subaru mumbled as he lifted his right arm, looking at the torn sleeve and the arm that peeked out from there. A dreadfully dark pattern that had surfaced on his right arm. An after effect of an encounter with the Sin Archbishops at the Watergate city of Pristella, but it was gone without a trace, despite having been indelible until now. That black pattern had treated the wounds of his tattered right arm. It was an event he remembered as a horrible memory, but it seemed like it was neither a dream nor a nightmare. No, it was a nightmare, but it appeared to be something that had really occurred. His crippled right arm had been healed, and Rem was at his bedside. That meant Subaru had finished the lifeblood ritual without dying, and he was also successful in taking back Rem, causing many casualties in return. Subaru. Rem, you look pale. I think you should stay in bed. She declared that as she looked at Subaru, who grew silent as he glanced down at his unnaturally taintless arm. Showing her concern to someone when they looked ill, even if she did not have a good opinion of them, was probably a result of her innate kindness. Or it may have been because Subaru's expression looked like a dead man's. A part of him wanted to depend on her kindness. However, he could not do that. There were too many things he had to make sure of. Subaru, thanks for worrying about me. But I have a lot of things I need to ask you about. Just asking, but this house belongs to someone from the people of Shadrach, right? Rem, they were calling themselves that, it seems. Subaru, I see. If that's the case, I want to see Ms. Eldesan and the others. Also, It was a subject he did not want to ask her about, but he could not afford to not verify it. Rem, who had been imprisoned in the Empire's camp, was here. If so, he was also curious about the person Louis, who was similarly held captive over there. To put it bluntly, he was worried. Not about Louis's safety, but more about the damage that would be caused if she were to be left alone. Subaru, I'm gonna be honest with you, but where's that girl? Louis? Rem. You have a disgruntled look on your face. Why do you keep her at a distance? Subaru, it's hard to explain. And I have reasons you probably won't understand even if I did. Any conversations regarding Louis would always incur Rem's displeasure. Subaru felt pained by that, but he also thought of it as a matter that could not be communicated by talking about it. Subaru, anyway, where's she? Was she left in the CA? Rem, you'd know if you looked to your left. Subaru, ah. Pondering over what she had told him, Subaru widened his eyes and directed them to his left towards the side opposite to Rem, who was at his right. And then, glancing over, Subaru's face grew stiff from the delayed bewilderment. Laying there was ZZZ. Subaru, W, ha. Louis was sleeping soundly, showing off her innocent, sleeping face. She was at his left side, sleeping in the same bed and wrapped in the same, ragged cloth. Saliva dripped down from her wide-open mouth, and looking at her shameless display, Subaru finally caught on to the situation. The identity of the stickiness and wet sensation on his chest and face, when he had awoken was Subaru. Subaru let out a soundless scream. Oh, Subaru. It seems like you've woken up without any problem. The person who welcomed Subaru as he showed up at the clearing, guided by Rem, was Mazelda. Her black hair dyed red, the young matriarch of the people of Shudrak walked over to Subaru, who exited the shack, and double-checked his condition from head to toe. He let out a small, dry laugh at Mazelda's unreserved, yet powerful demeanor that felt rather refreshing. Subaru, I made it back alive, thanks to you. It seems like I've made you worry, too. Mazelda, don't worry about it. If you were to die, all we have to do is return the soul of our brave comrade to the skies, and bury your corpse under the soil as we mourn. It's a good thing your soul remained instead of that happening. Subaru, Mazelda-san. Crossing her muscular arms, the olive-skinned, tall Mazelda held her head high. Her unpretentious words bore into his chest, and Subaru felt quietly and deeply impressed by them. Although, to be honest, back when he had been captured by the Shudrak and placed inside that prison, he had steeled himself for another death. Like that, while Subaru was impressed by her, Mazelda narrowed her eyes with a, by the way. Mazelda, it's too bad you're taken. Rem and Louis, will you add at least one more person? Rem, Mazelda-san. Next to Subaru, Rem raised her voice at Mazelda's somewhat mischievous-sounding offer. She had a stern expression on her face, still shaky on her feet as she walked with her new wooden cane. Having woken up just a little while ago, Louis was clinging onto her arm, her eyes widening out of surprise at Rem's voice. While caressing Louis's blonde hair, Rem called Mazelda by name once again, and then. Rem, you shouldn't say that. I do not trust or understand this person. Mazelda, then, could he be given to me? Rem, yes, of course. I will give him to you. Subaru, the conversation isn't reflecting my will. Louis, AAA. You. With a prickly attitude, Rem agreed to the proposal to transfer Subaru. When Subaru rushed to put a stop to it, Louis shouted as well, going along with the momentum of the atmosphere. I'm only joking, Mazelda laughed as she heard him, but Subaru could not hold back his astonishment once he saw her affable disposition. He could barely remember what had happened right after the lifeblood ritual. Even after that, he still could not define the line that distinguished his memories from his desires, made to be favorable to him. Seeing how Mazelda was acting, it did not seem like a fantasy, however. Subaru, so, for once, I was able to build a good relationship with someone I've met for the first time. That's great, but... Mazelda, MH, you look pale. Are you feeling unwell? I can cut off any impaired parts on your body. Subaru, I feel like it's going to turn out to be a disaster if I carelessly say, yes, please, so I'll decline. It was not a joke, but an earnest offer, probably. He figured it could be a fatal mistake if he were to say, yes, please, without thinking it through. Anyhow. Subaru, last time, I didn't have the time to look around leisurely, but... Going around in a circle to observe the village of the Shudrakians, Subaru muttered. The village existed deep inside a vast forest, and it looked like a world where the level of civilization's improvement had come to a halt, including the shack where Subaru had awoken. It was a sight befitting the impression of what would be called an ethnic minority, living in an uncultivated jungle. Amazons who lived their lives while taking part in hunting, with no male workers. It seemed like an undeveloped area, indeed, as Subaru saw no signs of civilization in the village. Subaru, their numbers are few, so they can keep living by going hunting every day, but Rem. Subaru murmured, knitting his eyebrows in a distressed manner while biting his lip. Rem was wordlessly staring at his face from the side, with a cross look on her face. Whatever she was thinking in the depths of her blue eyes, the current Subaru was unable to perceive it. He was scared of being unable to read her thoughts. He also could not smile back with ease at Mazelda, who had smiled at him. That was why, in order to overcome this situation. Subaru, I want to talk to you, Mazelda-san. I think I also need to speak to that guy, as well. Mazelda, yeah. You said it at a good time. He's probably at the meeting area with Tarita and the others right now. Hearing Subaru's words, Mazelda nodded and jerked her chin. She was pointing towards a large building at the back of the clearing, a place that had been referred to as the meeting area. It was most likely a place that fulfilled its role as its name suggested, and setting aside whether it was the most fine-looking construct in the village or not, it seemed as if the role had been assigned to the largest building. Subaru, let's go. Locating his destination, Subaru began walking in that direction. He held out his hand to be of assistance to Rem, just in case, but she had rejected it. Taking Lewis with her, she indicated that she would walk on her own with her attitude. Laughing dryly at the invariable response Rem sent towards him, Subaru tightened his expression. And then, the group passed through the entrance of the meeting area and went inside. There. It seems like you are finally awake. Have you enjoyed yourself, Natsuki Subaru? Yes, he was greeted by a masked man, who sat on the ground of the meeting area with one knee raised. Amidst the Shadrakians, who were surrounding a fire, a man had slipped into the center of the meeting place. Subaru's cheeks twitched at his reception, and he was also at a loss for words. Subaru. What is it? Surely, you shall not declare that you have lost your voice, in return for barely returning alive? A price such as that. Perhaps, it was an appropriate one to pay, looking at the results. Subaru, no, I haven't lost my voice. My voice isn't gone, but I'm at a loss for words. What's with that mask of yours? Having said that, Subaru pointed at the man who spoke in an arrogant manner. Placed on the man's face, where Subaru's finger was pointing at, was what looked like an Oni mask, painted in red and white. However, since the Oni existed as a race in this world, it could not be an actual Oni mask. A mask that simply resembled the face of something frightening. That was what the man was wearing. The man, sounding disinterested, responded to Subaru's indication with a yes. It is an offering. Originally, I had the intention of keeping my face hidden going forward. I suppose it will do. It was troublesome to re-wrap my face every time I washed it. Subaru, yeah, it looks like you might get itchy if it gets dirty. Wait, it's not the time to be talking about that. Oh? Grimacing at the man's indifference, Subaru walked towards him from the front without hesitating. And then, seated in a circle together with the man, Tarita attempted to stop him with a hey. However. Halt, Tarita. It seems as if this person has business with me. Tarita, why yes, however. When I say it is fine, then it is fine. Are there any other words that are necessary? Held back by none other than the man, Tarita shook her head and backed off. It seemed like the man had won over a hefty amount of trust from the people of Shadrach, all within a short time period. No, considering that attitude, control was more appropriate than trust. Tarita neither acted out of fear nor trust, but respect. The same applied to the other Shadrachians that surrounded the same area, at least. Subaru had no idea what sort of method the man had used in order to do that, however. Subaru, for now, I just want to speak to you, one-on-one. Vincent Abel Lux. Vincent. Subaru declared, standing in front of the man who was sitting, gazing down at him. He could not see how the man's expression had shifted behind his mask upon hearing Subaru's words. However, the air around the meeting place grew tense, and it was almost as if he could feel that the temperature had decreased. The pressure in the atmosphere almost made him inadvertently hold his breath, but Subaru endured it with willpower alone. And then... Vincent, I shall overlook the first time because of your befuddlement, so do not make me repeat myself. Therefore, know that there shall not be a third time. You shall withhold yourself from uttering my name indiscreetly. Subaru, what if I say, I don't want to? Vincent, I shall administer punishment accordingly. I know a great number of ways to force you to surrender. The man stood up on the spot, glaring at Subaru while facing him directly. Judging from the feeling of his proclamation and his demeanor, there were no falsehoods within the man's words. There was no possibility of them being a bluff, either. Even if the number of moves he could make and the measures he could take were limited, Subaru was sure the man could implement the punishment he had been talking about. Subaru, you're an annoying guy. Vincent, then, will you make me say it a third time? Subaru. No, I'll pass. I didn't come here to argue. Abel. It's meaningless to remain stubborn, Subaru thought, giving in first. Like that, Subaru decided he would heed the advice of the masked man and call him Abel. Drawing his chin back at Subaru's decision, Abel commented, a wise choice. Abel, had you not withdrawn, then there would have been an instance of bloodshed. Subaru, ha, you wish. I'll probably offend you if I say this, but I think it'll be just barely an even match if we both went at it. Abel, if that is the case, you are the one who should look behind himself. Subaru, behind myself. Abel said to Subaru, who had received his earlier words as provocation and crinkled up his nose. When he complied and turned around, his shoulders shook as he exclaimed, Yue. Rem was standing there, watching the argument unfold between the two men with an icy stare. Subaru, Rem-san? Your face. Rem, no? It's just. Even after you were about to die, having been asleep for 3 days, it seems like you're ridiculously stubborn, refusing to take good care of your own body. Why don't you just drop dead at the side of the road, then? Subaru, sorry. I'm sorry, I won't do it again. Giving in to Rem's cold eyes, Subaru apologized desperately. In the end, he could not make any changes to Rem's disappointed expression, but he had a sudden realization. It came out of the blue, but there was a high possibility that the reason why Subaru had been able to survive, narrowly escaping from his death, was thanks to healing magic, unless there was some sort of miraculous elixir. If that was the case, the person who did that was Abel, including that, I must speak with you. Subaru, Abel. Abel had apparently deciphered Subaru's feelings after seeing him hold his breath. He shrugged his shoulders lightly, then turned his face in Mazelda's direction. Abel, Mazelda, make everyone leave. I only require myself and this man to be here. Mazelda, well, you're just doing as you please, now. I would have been angry if you weren't handsome. Tarita, sister, please get angry even if you're up against a handsome man. While Mazelda obeyed Abel's orders without any resistance, Tarita's shoulders dropped as she looked at her sister. However, Tarita had also followed Abel's command earlier, so her words were unconvincing. Once Mazelda, the chief of the tribe, had been persuaded, the other people of Shudrak would not stay put. All of them streamed out of the meeting place, one after another. The problem was whether Rem, and in addition, Louis should be placed among the wave of Shadrakians, but... Abel, it is inconvenient for you to speak about your desired topic if that woman is here, is it not? Subaru, GH. He saw through the reason of my hesitation, Subaru thought, his breath catching in his throat from Abel's words. However, in the end, what Abel had said was correct. Subaru did not want Rem to hear the conversation that would come after this. Subaru, Rem, can you step outside with everyone else? It'll be over soon. Or, well, I don't know if we'll get it done soon, but we won't take too long. Rem, when you put that way, it sounds like I'm the one who's behaving like a spoiled child. Subaru, I didn't mean it like that. Then, can you step outside for now? Rem, what would you do if I were to say, I don't want to? Subaru, He was astonished by Rem's response, having believed his hands to be already full from dealing with Abel. Subaru immediately understood she was ridiculing his interaction with Abel from a short while ago, but he was a complete pushover whenever Rem held her ground. If it were possible, he wanted to grant any of her wishes and let her do whatever she wanted to do. However, Subaru, I don't want you to listen to this. Rem, I could remain here by force. Subaru, then I'm being cheap, but I'll run away in that case. If Subaru started running, then Rem would not be able to catch up to him with her speed, since she had to use a cane. That was the only point where Subaru could clearly surpass her right now. He had to say it was rather shameful of him, as Subaru could not think of anything else other than that. Louis, you. Louis groaned as she pulled Rem's arm, in front of the distressed Subaru. Apparently, she was trying to take Rem out of the meeting place. Looking at Louis, Rem chuckled. Rem, I'm sorry, I must have made you worry. It's just... I wanted to say mean things to this smelly person, just a little bit. Louis, AUU. Subaru, smelly person. The term pierced him, deep and razor-sharp, more so than any other mean things, but that was currently not of importance. Just as she had told Louis, Rem quickly withdrew with a, well then, and left the meeting place with the blonde girl in tow, while using her cane. Subaru scratched his cheek as he watched Rem's back, with it never turning around for her to look back at him. Whether Rem seriously did not have any interest in Subaru, or whether she had said that out of consideration, it was hard for him to make a judgment. Of course, he would be happier if it were the latter, however. Subaru, she was brought here with the worst impression of me. I won't wish for more, that's my lifestyle. Abel, you have downright ridiculous perseverance and vanity. Sit, I shall listen to what you have to say. And so, the two were left alone in the meeting area. Following what Abel said, Subaru dropped himself onto the ground, sitting cross-legged. In front of him, Abel also seated himself on the ground, with one knee up. He watched Subaru through his mask. Sitting opposite of the burning bonfire in the middle, the two men faced off against each other. Subaru, first thing I want to ask, how much of it was a dream, and how much of it was real? Abel, HM. I suppose that is a question no one but you would ask. How would you like me to answer? Everything was a dream, we avoided utter catastrophe and the situation is approaching a peaceful conclusion. Would hearing that satisfy you? Subaru, you know Utakata and utter catastrophe kinda sound similar, you might confuse me with the girl if you say that. A young girl, one of the people of Shadrach. Subaru was pretty sure her name was Utakata. The unintentional pun was confusing, but that was not the true meaning behind Abel's words. No, Subaru understood what Abel had meant, and used that light joke as a brief escape. Abel did not overlook Subaru's timidity. Abel, I do not plan to keep up with your cowardice, Natsuki Subaru. Subaru, yeah, I know. Attacking the Empire's camp, that was real, correct? Abel, of course, that is correct. The Empire's camp deployed outside of Budheim was completely destroyed with the power of the Shadrach. The scene you saw was no illusion. Again, Abel confirmed the reality of that scene. Hearing that, Subaru felt something profoundly heavy pierce the back of his chest. Tightly biting his lips, he used the pain to keep his consciousness from fading. That kind of easy escape was not permitted for Natsuki Subaru. Subaru. I understand the situation now. You commanded the people of Shadrach and attacked the Empire's campsite, chasing them away. That's the gist of it. Abel, yes. However, that explanation is lacking. Let me supplement. Subaru, supplement? Abel, I commanded the Shadrach to destroy the encampment. Moreover, that was done with no casualties suffered on our side. Subaru. So, is that you just bragging about how amazing your commanding ability is? Abel, no, that is not the case. This feat is your achievement. Towards Abel, who shook his head, Subaru widened his eyes in surprise with an audible ah. It was a completely unexpected statement. Abel actually acknowledging Subaru's achievements was one thing in and of itself, but Subaru could not even fathom as to why he was getting any sort of credit. What in the world was he talking about? Abel, do you not understand? The reason why the Shadrach and I could achieve a flawless victory was because we had detailed knowledge of the enemy's organization. We got this information from none other than you yourself. Subaru, ha? On top of his raised knee, Abel spoke with his chin rested on his hand. Meanwhile, Subaru's thoughts came to a standstill. Those words were completely contrary to his expectations. It did not just come out of left field, it gut-punched him from left field. Finding it difficult to accept the implications behind those words, Subaru opened and closed his mouth silently like a fish. Abel, if you roughly know the enemy's stationing, layout and personnel, the probability of success of a siege rises. In reality, we won with no casualties. That was your contribution. You even received a reward. Subaru, reward. Abel, we safely rescued your woman. I reward work. I do not have the ability to reward the dead. I thought that only while you still drew breath, but, the devil's luck in you is strong. Although he had been told that he had extremely good luck, Subaru was still in a state of shock. It could be that, as far as Abel was concerned, those words were supposed to be considered a compliment or praise. However, unfortunately, Subaru did not have the capacity to accept them, nor did he have the mores rooted in him to do so. That was natural, of course. Why did he have to be happy about being useful as a tool of war? Subaru, why did I even talk about the campsite? Abel, it was the side effects of the medicine. After finishing the lifeblood ritual, you were on the verge of death. There was a need to keep you alive until the takeover of the campsite and the rescue of the woman was complete. The medicine used kept your mind in a clouded state. Hence why you spoke. Subaru, I just blabbed about anything that was asked of me. Aghast, Subaru held his face in his hands, his voice trembling. It was true, Subaru had a general understanding of the particulars inside the encampment. He had once spent several days in the camp as a choreboy after all. He knew what was where and the rough number of people that were there. He also knew where their weapons and tools were stored, so if one were to crush those locations as a first strike, it was no question that they would get the overwhelming advantage. He understood that. He understood, but so what if he did? Subaru, medicine. Are you messing with me? Using that kind of thing without asking me? You? Abel, however, without it, you would have died, unable to reunite with the woman. It means the woman's healing magic would not have reached you, either. There is no reason for you to speak ill of me, who let a dead man live. Subaru, oh of course there is. I didn't want to assist in a war. So many people died, but you're... Abel, it seems like you are misunderstanding something. He said bluntly to Subaru, who was breathing heavily, positioned in a stance to denounce evil. Pierced by the coldness in Abel's tone, Subaru stiffened his cheeks. Subaru, misunderstand, you say? What am I misunderstanding, exactly? Abel, for example, we shall pretend your consciousness was not befuddled by the medicine. In order to rescue that woman, you would still need the aid of the Shudrak, nevertheless. Naturally, you would disclose what you know, and give it your all. If so, you would have spoken about who was assigned to where in the camping grounds. Subaru, Abel, you understand it, do you not? The result would be the same. Whether you were on the verge of death or not, the secrets of the encampment would be exposed by your knowledge, and those soldiers would perish. Receiving Abel's indication, Subaru searched for a way to protest against it. However, Abel was correct, and Subaru could imagine what would have happened in that case, off the top of his head. In fact, had he lived through the lifeblood ritual in a better state, and had there been a discussion on forming a plan to save Rem, then Subaru would have talked about the Empire's camp. He would have divulged the positions of the soldiers, as well as their numbers, and he would have used his knowledge to aid him in thinking up any measures to save Rem. Subaru, but I would be a part of the Council of War in that case. I would have definitely been against a strategy that would result in casualties. So, Abel, you claim you would have been able to convince them? Would it have been possible for you to convince the people who do not know, nor have any other means aside from bloodshed, find a more appropriate method of carrying things out, and save the woman without any casualties, peacefully and civilly? Subaru, that's... Abel, I will tell you this. That is what would be called a pipe dream. Pierced by Abel's words, Subaru's soul shrieked as it bled out. No, he wanted to yell, wanted to deny Abel's words. However, everything that came out of his mouth was baseless, driven by emotion, and it would not be able to inflict a single crack on Abel's mask, nor make his expression waver. The things they saw were different from one another. They led their own lives differently. Contrasting views on life and death laid within Subaru and Abel, as well as the people of Shudrak. And it was impossible to remove and break through such a wall. During the short time in which he had lost Rem, at the very least. Certainly. Subaru was sure of it. Subaru, I didn't want to give up just because of that. Abel, in return for your perseverance, someone other than you would die. Perhaps, that person may be a complete stranger to you. Or they could be someone who may be akin to your other half. When you stand still and indulge in your foolish thoughts, it means you are allowing that to happen. Abel carried on with shoving it into his face, despite Subaru cursing the unforgivable reality while grinding his teeth. Perhaps, in exchange for the harsh, unmerciful way of how things had been done, Abel had reeled in a definite result. However, why did he have the privilege of selecting which lives would be lost in return? Subaru, who do you think you are? Do you think you've become a god or something? Abel, fool. I am neither a god nor a hero. Naturally, I am also different from those wicked observers who look down on this world. I am a king. A king amongst kings. Subaru. Abel, the one who stands at the apex, is called the emperor by their people. I am that. Abel announced, placing a hand on his chest daringly. Subaru could not see his expression beyond the mask that hid his face. However, Subaru imagined Abel's face, a face he had only seen once, displaying a bold smile, a bright fire lit within his eyes. Emperor. Hearing that, the thought of holding his breath completely slipped from his mind. The man had proved his existence with his own words, in such an imposing, majestic way. And then, Abel Vincent Abelux continued speaking to Subaru, the latter shell-shocked, the former maintaining the dignified tone of his voice. Vincent, the 77th Emperor of the Sacred Empire of Wallachia. That is me. Subaru. Vincent, however, I have left my position as of now, having been ousted from the apex. Chapter 14, Unbridgeable Values. Subaru. The 77th Emperor of the Sacred Wallachian Empire. Hearing Abel give his title, Subaru's mind went blank. The reason was not because he was unable to take in the meaning of the words, nor that he was afraid to square off against royalty. Certainly, in this other world he was in, this was the first time Subaru had met royalty in person. By the time when Subaru had been summoned to another world, all members of the royal family of the Kingdom of Lugunica had succumbed to illness. Felt was suspected of being a surviving royal, but Felt didn't recognize herself as such, and since she had nary a trace of anything like royalness, she didn't count. In that respect, of all the people Subaru had met in this world, the ones of the highest station were the people he happened to see at the place of the royal selection, the dignitaries of the Council of Wise Men, or perhaps the Duchess Crush. Roswell was also a margrave of a remote region, which in itself was a high position. Actually, as Amelia was a royal candidate in the selection of the next sovereign, what kind of position did that correspond to? Subaru, wait, this isn't time to be running away from reality. Subaru restrained himself before his thoughts could become scattered and chaotic. In any case, the important thing was that Abel had revealed himself to be the emperor. Ever since he came across him on the jungle plain, Subaru had a feeling he was no ordinary person. Still, he would never have imagined that this person actually held the position of emperor. Provided that. Subaru, well, if it's actually true. Abel, you doubt my word? Subaru, it's only natural to doubt it. How is it in the middle of a forest I just happened to get stuck with the most preeminent person in the country? I can easily believe your brazenness is emperor class, but... Then, Subaru paused, and scowled directly at the fiendish face Abel wore. From Abel's side, only the sharpness of his gaze could be felt as they stood facing each other, which was not fair. Certainly, there was a strength of will in Abel's voice that only a person of importance could possess. Having come in contact with people of various stations in this world, Subaru's intuition verified that. Still, that was not what this was about. Subaru, it's like I said before. How the hell am I supposed to trust a guy who doesn't even show his face, huh? Opposite the open fire, through the flickering flames, Abel considered Subaru's words. Subaru glared harshly at Abel's masked visage, referring to the words they had exchanged while he watched the burning encampment in a daze. Abel's face had been concealed by old rags rather than a mask then, but he had said the same thing to him. And finally, having heard that, Abel had undone the binds and revealed his face of his own accord. Abel, you are a tiresome man, going on and on about inconsequential matters. While saying that, he set the mask to the side, in that same moment. Subaru. Abel, what is with that insolent look? There is nothing about me that is exceptionally different from you. Subaru, that's true, in part. I'm sensing God's spite in the arrangement. Staring fixedly at Abel's face, the irony of it struck Subaru. It could be said that Abel and Subaru were similar. However, that was only speaking in broad terms. When broken down to a finer degree, they were different on a grand scale. Glossy black hair, an imposing sharp-eyed look. It was an overbearingly powerful impression, but his devilish face had a peculiar charm that was difficult to look away from. That was the countenance of the emperor of the sacred Valachian Empire. Nevertheless, Subaru had no recognition of that face. From his position as a knight of the royal selection candidate Amelia, he had, somehow, also become involved in national affairs of a neighboring country. Subaru, is that how it is? Even though you're at the top of the nation, your face is. Abel, there is no reason you would know it. From the beginning, my face has not been seen outside of the imperial capital. The reason being there are far too many in this country aiming for my head. Subaru, so it's for self-defense? You must have really stirred up people's resentment, huh? Abel, no. It is because being powerful is the creed of the citizens of the empire. The weak-willed must die, the frail must die, and the cowardly must die, because the strong deserve to have it all. Subaru. Abel, the position of the emperor is also no exception. It is the grounds for the empire's unparalleled strength as a nation. Resting his chin on his own knees, Abel spoke of Valachia's extreme ideology, leaving Subaru at a loss. His words were not false. Having spent a few days at the imperial soldiers' camp, Subaru knew it too. Todd and the other imperial soldiers would likely greatly approve of Abel's words just now. Them included, the citizens of the empire earnestly believed in the notion that victory would balance out everything. The way they existed was the embodiment of, long live the empire. If they could fulfill that, then they would not hesitate to burn down the jungle to exterminate a tribe. If they could fulfill that, launching a surprise attack on their fellow countrymen and massacring the soldiers was also. Subaru, wait, that doesn't make any sense. Abel, what is it? Subaru, for example. For example, if you were really the emperor, then why did you attack the imperial soldiers' camp? If you just walked over there and spoke with the camps higher up, then. Abel, fool. How could I saunter over there with such nonchalance? I do not have a desire to end my own life. Do not lump me in with yourself. Subaru, I don't have a death wish either. But, suicide. Subaru did not understand the reason as to why an emperor interacting with his country's soldiers would be referred to as a suicidal act. To Abel, all of those imperial soldiers should be his subordinates. It was unreasonable to consider it as a suicidal act to interact with them. No, there was a way to rationalize it. That was, Subaru, if I haven't misheard it, then. Did you say you were ousted from the position of the emperor? Abel, it seems like you did not fail to hear it. However, I have also announced that I will not repeat myself. Subaru, don't joke around. It's an important section, isn't it? Is it true that you've really been kicked out of the emperor's? With Abel's unchanging expression, Subaru started to doubt whether he was a human like Subaru himself, or not. Because if Abel's circumstances were just as Subaru had predicted, then he must be in a situation that was practically hopeless. The thought made Subaru hesitate to continue his words. Abel, your way of thinking is correct. However, Abel nodded, stepping over Subaru's hesitation with ease. In front of Subaru, who was holding his breath, Abel's gaze was lowered ever so slightly, staring at the burning fire. The wood crackled amidst the flames, and the faint noise sounded as if they were throes of death. Abel closed one eye whilst listening to it. Abel, the group of imperial soldiers that had been deployed outside of Budheim were dispatched by my political opponents, in order to dispose of me. To be precise, you have become embroiled in this. Subaru, but, the people at the camp didn't say anything about that. They said their objective was to negotiate with the people of Shudrak in the forest. It was not like Subaru had the ability to see through someone's lies. Even with that, he thought it unrealistic to consider that everyone, in a place where dozens of people had been crowded together, had coordinated their stories to match each other's, all just to deceive the outsiders who were Subaru and Rem. That was why the imperial soldiers Todd and his group had believed they were after the people of Shudrak. Subaru, though, capturing you being their true objective is. Abel, do not beat around the bush. They were plotting an attack. You are the one who said that. And then, in order to protect yourself and the woman, you have weighed the Shadrakians and the imperial soldiers on a scale. Subaru, no. Abel, I am not mistaken. What has already occurred cannot be changed. Those soldiers will not come back to life. The dead will not speak of anything, nor are they able to exert their influence upon the living. Subaru. The dead will not come back to life. Subaru squeezed his eyes shut, struck by Abel's fierce words. How dare he say whatever as he pleased, when he knew absolutely nothing? There was a way to revive the dead. The method was the one and only authority, which only Subaru was capable of holding. Subaru. If he were to return by death, then there was a possibility he could go back to the time before the encampment was wiped out. Once he did that, Subaru could warn the imperial soldiers and save them from their deadly fate, perhaps. However, if he did that, then the safety of the people of Shudrak would be put in jeopardy. He was trapped in a dilemma of choosing which side would be left standing at the cost of the other side. It was difficult to save both of them, when they stood diametrically opposed to each other. More than anything, Subaru did not have the courage to return by death for them. Even if he did redo it, how much of a chance did he have at being even more successful? This time, the fact that Subaru and Rem were safe could be referred to as second best, rather than the very best. Asking for anything more than that was equivalent to confronting an endless challenge. In order to do that, letting his own life wear down would be. Abel, you are a foolish man, bearing enigmatic woes. As Subaru asked and answered his own question, Abel's words had abruptly disturbed his eardrums. Subaru's eyes flew open out of astonishment, unable to comprehend what Abel had said to him for a moment. Abel was staring at Subaru from the front, on the other side of the flickering flames. It was almost as if Abel was pitying him with that gaze of his. Abel, why would you always desire to curry favor with others? Subaru, curry favor? You're saying. I do that. Abel, you are always gazing at others. You have intentionally constructed yourself to be that way. Similar to how a warrior would hone their skills, you have concealed your own heart with a deception called charity. Subaru, HK, it's none of your business. Intense rage coursed through Subaru as Abel spoke as if he understood him. To someone who did not know anything about Subaru himself, nor about return by death, it was impossible for him to understand even a fraction of what Subaru was saddled with. There was no reason for Subaru to be lectured, nor pitted. Subaru, you haven't answered my question at all. The imperial soldiers were after the people of Shudrak. They never mentioned anything about why. Abel, it is a topic that is not disclosed to the foot soldiers. I suppose even the commander is unaware. The emperor, having left his position, is not something that could afford to be leaked out of the empire. Neither do I, nor those who have deposed me, wish for the empire to be shaken. Subaru. Abel, additionally, it was inevitable that they would target the Shadrakians. Forced out of the emperor's throne, the only hand an emperor can take after escaping the capital are the Shadrakians. Therefore, killing the people of Shadrach is equivalent to cutting my hands and feet and sinking me to the bottom of water when I am already half drowning. Letting Abel's nonchalant explanation sink in, Subaru's questions melted away. Why Todd and the rest of the imperial soldiers surrounded the jungle? Why they sought to negotiate with the people of Shadrach to demilitarize them or otherwise exterminate them? Only now did he understand the reason for it all. Subaru. Why are the Shadrakians the only ones you can rely on? Abel, an emperor of Wallachia, has saved Shadrach from a predicament in times past. Shadrakians never forget their debts. There is also the lifeblood ritual. They are my path to victory. The old debt that the tribe pridefully owed to the emperor, and the way the Shadrakians respected their rituals. Driven away from the imperial capital, Abel bet on that and attempted contact with the people of Shadrach. Consequently, Abel's political opponents tried to prevent him from doing so, by dispatching imperial soldiers to the jungle to try and entomb the emperor. It was a bet with terrible odds, but one could say that he had won that gamble. Superbly defying the opponent's expectations, he repelled the enemy's first wave that was meant to corner him. However, even Subaru knew the opponent would not stay their hand here. Subaru, you and your enemy's battle hasn't ended. Abel, of course. It would end if I were to die. However, I still draw breath. Therefore, to take back my things, I shall use my utmost power to go and reclaim them. That was the emperor of Wallachia, Abel Vincent of Bellix's choice. To Subaru, the word things that Abel had used seemed like it had an asterisk next to it, with a note saying this actually means country. The scale in which Abel looked at things was too big for Subaru. At the same time as being overwhelmed by his absurdity, Subaru came to realize something far too late. Subaru, so, you're planning to start a war using the people of Shadrach? Abel, correct. I have made them promise cooperation. The results of the lifeblood ritual and the pact they made with the emperor before. People who extol pride are easy to manipulate. They will undoubtedly fight with me. Subaru, you're saying it wasn't enough after doing all that? Retaking the emperor's throne. To do that, there would inevitably be more battles to come. Resulting in war, a fierce battle where humans would fight other humans, with their lives on the line. Abel. The imperial camp, which had been burnt to the ground. As far as Subaru knew, there had been at least 100 imperial soldiers there. If Abel and the Shadrakians had only attacked that one encampment, even if there were some who managed to escape, there had been over 100 casualties. If not, it was probably safe to say casualties had not reached 1,000. During the few hours Subaru spent unconscious, over 100 lives had been lost. Subaru, just because of that. Throughout the days he had lived in another world, this was the experience with the most casualties. There had been victims at the White Whale subjugation and at the fight with Betelgeuse. There were people he could not save at the fights in Priestella, and even more in times now gone. Compared to those unpreventable casualties, the number of lives lost here was greater. Additionally, the enemies fought were not witch beasts, nor were they evil entities. They were human beings. They were not people who could not be reasoned with. They were people who could come to an understanding with dialogue. Subaru, why did they have to be killed? Abel, there was no other method. That is all. Subaru. Is that really true? Did you seriously try and find another way? Before all your options were snatched away by murdering them, did you try to find another option until the very end? Abel. Abel narrowed his eyes at Subaru's feeble grievances. His look told Subaru that, instead of carefully considering Subaru's opinion, he was questioning as to why he had to do something like that. He was questioning the fundamental part of Subaru's argument. It was not like he did not understand the words exchanged, nor was it that he was unwilling to partake in discourse. The reason they could not come to an understanding despite this, was because Abel's ethics were terrifyingly secluded from his own. Fortunately for Natsuki Subaru, until now, he had not fallen into a situation where he had to build a relationship with someone whose values greatly differed from his. The majority of people he had encountered in this other world were rational. They lent their ears to Subaru and interacted with him, while communicating their own opinions. Once upon a time, an idiotic Subaru had failed to understand this and was thus unable to notice their tact, resulting in him throwing all that away. Even so, he managed until now. The people he had been unable to come to an understanding, because of their different sets of values, were mostly either witches or sin archbishops. However, by defining them as different beings, Subaru could continue going on without having to knock morals with them. But Abel was different. The people of Shudrak and the Imperial soldiers were also different. They held no ill will, they did not toy with life and death, and they did not wield tremendous power for selfish reasons. Excluding their base principles, they were humans, just like Subaru. But even then, Subaru. I just want to bring Rem home. The battle to retake Abel's throne was going to commence. If this were another person's affair, or if it was a past event detailed in a biography or something similar, Subaru would eagerly turn those pages with excitement. This was reality, however. In a foreign country, where there was no one to rely on, a fierce internal struggle that would shake the very foundation of the country was about to take place. To intervene in this situation and try to change history, there were no plans to even entertain that thought in Subaru. The objective was to bring Rem and return to the kingdom of Lugunica. He needed to reunite with Emilia and Beatrice, his friends at Roswell's mansion, as soon as possible. They had to celebrate Rem's awakening and discuss what to do moving forward. Any issues other than that, he could not keep up with. Subaru, tell me the location of the nearest town or village. I'll find a way back from there. Tapping his cheeks with both his hands, Subaru stated his single-minded goal. Receiving that, Abel responded with a small sigh. Abel, that makes sense. Nevertheless, it will not be a simple path. Subaru, easy or difficult, if it is necessary, I will walk that path. A paved path though, if possible. Abel, humph. Standing up in front of the snorting Abel, Subaru strongly bit the inside of his cheek. Stimulating his brain with the pain, he struck down his rising doubts and faced forward. He looked towards Abel, who remained unmoving. The lonely emperor had one of his eyes closed, his gaze crossing over with Subaru. Subaru, I still haven't thanked you. Putting aside the method in which you did it, thank you for rescuing Rem. I'm grateful for that. Abel, it was not only the girl, another one was rescued too. Subaru, that was unnecessary. Thanks to you, my worries will stay as is for a while. Of course, even in the case Lewis had been lost in the Imperial camp, it did not mean that the problems Subaru held would be neatly resolved. If one were to narrow it down to just his problems with Rem, there was a rather high chance that his relationship with her would become more strained. He did not know which was better. And because he did not know, Subaru, I will pick the path that I agree with. I have mixed feelings about it, but you do the best you can do. But the people of Shudrak. Abel, are you saying I should not involve them? Either way, if you and I did not intervene, a scorched jungle was what awaited them. This is already their fight too. Subaru. There was no room for denial. They were already in a position where they were forced to fight to protect themselves. However, Subaru, it's impossible for me. I don't think I will ever be able to become like you. Shaking his head, Subaru muttered while looking at Abel. Abel had one of his eyes closed. The closed eyelid was opposite of the one before. To explain further, Abel's blinking was unique. He would blink one eye at a time, never letting both eyes be closed at the same time. Subaru recognized that this was done so that both eyes would never be closed even for an instant. Subaru feared the Valachian emperor, who lived in a world where habits like that were formed just to survive, as the one on the apex of the Sword Wolf's empire. He feared in reverence. Listening to his mutterings, Abel, unsurprisingly, with one eye closed. Abel, naturally. You, nor anyone else, would be fit to be my substitute. Stated that. Leaving the people of Shudrak, Subaru and his group would be heading to the town closest to the Budheim jungle. Such a decision had been made by Subaru. After the people surrounding him had listened to it, their reaction was unexpectedly mild. I see. It's unfortunate, but if that is my comrade's decision, it can't be helped. That was Mazelda's reaction after hearing what Subaru had to say. She regarded his decision with respect, her dignified face tinted with sadness to some degree, just as what her words suggested. Truthfully, Subaru had made his declaration whilst bracing himself against verbal abuse, such as, "You're not a warrior if you don't fight," so he felt all the more regretful because of her thoughtfulness. Once Subaru had obtained permission from the chief, no one could stand in the way of his decision. The existence of Utakata, who appeared to be more dejected than Mazelda, made Subaru feel reluctant to leave, as if something was tugging at the back of his hair. However, it would not become a reason for him to stay here. Utakata, Sue is going somewhere. You feels sad. Subaru, yeah, I'm sorry. Hey, do you know what's going to happen from now on? Subaru asked her, caressing the girl's head as she pinched his sleeve. Not a single doubt was held against the values and their sense of unity, and there was no mistaking the fact that Mazelda's decision was the tribe's decision, but Utakata was still young. If she had been pulled by the flow of the people around her without understanding anything. Utakata? A battle's going to start now. You will fight together with me, TAA, and everyone. Subaru, I see. As Utakata said that, showing off the bow she had equipped on her back, Subaru blew out a sigh. He wanted young children to remain ignorant. As expected, such deceit was a facile idea that did not apply to this jungle. In the first place, Utakata had once achieved putting Subaru to death by shooting him with a poisoned arrow. Even if she did not look like it, she was definitely one of the people of Shudrak. She possessed the resolve to fight, as well as the resolve to kill her opponent. Nevertheless, Subaru, don't die, Utakata. Utakata, you won't die. Make sure you don't die, too. And do your best. Although he attempted to cheer her on, a larger voice of encouragement was returned to him, causing Subaru to choke up, managing to respond to her by putting on a feeble smile. In all honesty, Subaru could not imagine how much of a chance at victory that Abel and the Shadrakians would have in their battle. Targeting Abel, who had been deprived of his status as an emperor, their opponents had dispatched a subjugation force to the Budheim jungle. That meant the enemy was in a state where they were able to move around the forces that made up the fighting strength of the empire at their own discretion. Meanwhile, the only force that Abel held were the Shadrakians, and they were a small group of less than 100 people. Of course, there was a possibility that Abel would consecutively stack victory after victory by utilizing an otherworldly, unfathomable plan similar to the one he had used to launch a one-sided assault on the Empire's camp, forcing them to retreat, but everything is all set. Subaru, HK. While Subaru had been controlled by the very thoughts he had supposedly casted away by changing his mindset, someone called out to him from the side, like that. Subaru immediately turned around, his shoulders jolting, and the person also widened her eyes from his momentum. What's the matter? Why are you so surprised? The person looking at the stiff-faced Subaru was Rem, who had said that. With a wooden stick in one hand and carrying a small amount of baggage on her back, Rem appeared to have finished getting ready to leave the forest, just like Subaru. Yes, when Subaru had informed her that he had chosen to leave the forest, the person who had reacted to it in the most unexpected way had been none other than Rem. To be honest, Subaru had thought she would oppose him stubbornly, therefore creating a need for him to persuade her. In the worst case, he would forcefully take Rem outside while she was asleep, having steeled himself to part ways with the Shadrakians' village with the momentum of an escape under the cover of night. However, Rem's reaction towards Subaru, who had revealed their circumstances to her with the expectation of being rejected, had been surprisingly simple. Rem. I understand. I will finish making preparations by tomorrow. That was why, even when Subaru looked at Rem once she had finished making preparations for travel, he could not really accept it as something that had actually occurred. Rem, Subaru, No, sorry, I'm alright. Yeah, your preparations look great, too. Cute. Rem, huh? Subaru, I mean, you're reliable. Thank you. With you being such a responsible person, I'm such a fortunate guy. His reply was awkward to the point Rem stared at him with a doubtful look. It was not like he wished to curry favor with Rem. Since he was in a condition where he would be saved by Rem's lack of resistance, of course, so maintaining their current relationship was the most desirable. Ideally, he wanted her to warm up to him, however. Subaru. He could test that out again when he had a calmer state of mind. For now, his honest opinion was that he wished to distance himself from the presence of war, which hung densely in the air, as soon as possible. Rem, so, have you finished your preparations? It seemed like you had the time to be reluctant about leaving, but... Subaru, yeah, it's all good. I didn't have much baggage to begin with, and you're going to be carrying most of them. Rem, but, you're going to be carrying me. With a drop in the tone of her voice, Rem snuck a glance at the handmade, wooden framework that had been placed in the clearing. It was a wooden rack that had been assembled for Subaru to carry Rem on his back while traveling, weaved out of a combination of thick branches and vines. Rem was able to walk with some difficulty by use of her cane, but the journey from this place to the nearest town would take a few days. In the meantime, he did not know how time-consuming it would be if he were to walk at the same speed as Rem. Because of that, the wooden frame had been created through the cooperation of Subaru and the Shadrakians. Subaru, it feels pretty handmade, but there should be no issues with its durability. I already tested it out with Tarita-san, who's heavier than you, so... Rem, I'm not really concerned about heaviness or lightness, but I think you're being rude to Tarita-san. Incurring Rem's displeasure once again, Subaru scratched his cheek with a dry laugh. And then, he directed his gaze behind Rem towards Lewis, their fellow traveling companion. It went without saying, but if Subaru were to bring Rem with him, then Lewis would also be accompanying them. Subaru, there's no way I could force a bomb onto everyone of the Shudrak, after all. Even if that was not the case, taking his eyes off a Sin Archbishop was purely preposterous. There had been many instances where he had looked away from Lewis, and that meant she had had plenty of opportunities to reveal her true nature, but he did not want to let her do that from now on. Even if he had started to believe that Lewis's behavior was not an act, but actually genuine. Lewis, you. The girl in question had her long hair tied behind her head, and also had her white clothes mended, her attire giving her a wholly different impression. Apparently, the Shadrakians had been fond of Lewis in their village, and her repaired clothes were a gift from them. Subaru, sorry for making your tribe do pretty much everything for us. Mazelda, don't worry about it, Subaru. You have overcome the lifeblood ritual, displaying the brightness of your soul. The fact that we're lending our strength to you is obviously to honor our comrade. Subaru, comrade. Subaru dropped his eyes at Mazelda's words, as she came over to see him off, her arms crossed. He could not face Mazelda, who has been referring to him as her comrade with such friendliness. After all, he knew that a harsh battle was looming upon them, and he was aware of being one of the very people who had involved the people of Shudrak into that, yet he was trying to flee from this place. Would something like that be what a fellow comrade, dignified and honorable just as the tribe had described him, actually do? Mazelda, don't trouble yourself about it, Subaru. However, Mazelda said that as if she had deciphered his inner thoughts. Subaru, Mazelda-san. Mazelda, we fight to prove our worth. However, we create our future by protecting those dear to us until the end. It's way of thinking that's necessary in order to protect our tribe. Subaru. Mazelda, protect Rem and Lewis. That is the honor we expect from our comrade. Subaru felt the corners of his eyes grow hot from Mazelda's straightforward words. He did not feel like correcting Mazelda, saying she had misunderstood about Lewis. He had to at least fulfill that role, to answer to the trust Mazelda and the others had put in him. Or, although he would never meet the Shadrakians ever again. We're ready. Now is a good opportunity to take our leave. Right as Subaru had been spurred by Mazelda, a woman with yellow-tipped hair, waving her hand exaggeratedly Holly, called over to him with a wide grin. Next to her was Cuna, who had a slender build, her hair dyed green. The cheerful Holly and in contrast, the reticent-looking Cuna. Those two were the guardians of Subaru's group. Arrangements had been made so that the two Shadrakians would be protecting Subaru, Rem, and Lewis, ensuring they would not be attacked by anything on their way to Geralt, the nearest town. Subaru, I'm super grateful for bodyguards, but I also feel like it's too much. Even though this was a foreign country, and Subaru had already died multiple times in the mere span of a few days. He could not deny it was a unique situation, but it was the safest to take precautions. Subaru himself did not have enough prowess as a fighter to be confident in his own abilities, and it was fruitless to depend on Rem and Lewis. He could say nothing regarding Cuna, but he had also seen Holly lift a boulder effortlessly with his own eyes. They were more than reliable as the group's bodyguards during their journey. And then, Subaru, Rem, does it hurt anywhere? Subaru asked Rem over his shoulder, while pulling up the wooden rack. Since they would be positioned back-to-back with the handmade frame between them, Subaru could not see Rem's face from where he was. He had tried packing in soft leaves and fabric to secure her body, but there would be a few inconveniences considering they would be traveling for a long time. Rem, I'm fine. Are you okay with this? Subaru, I've been training myself moderately, at least. My stamina hasn't completely returned, but I want to prevent Holly and Cuna's hands from being full, in the case of emergency. In the first place, he was immensely thankful towards the two Shadrakians for being their escorts, but making them carry Rem on top of that was something he could never dare to ask for. Subaru, demonstrating his stubbornness, Rem, carried by him, and Lewis had lined up as a group. Accompanying them were Holly and Cuna, having finished their preparations despite being lightly dressed, and they all stood together. Then, the people of Shudrak began crowding around the entrance of the village. Mazelda, well then, may the tranquility and objective of our fellow comrade, Natsuki Subaru, be fulfilled. People of Shudrak, may it be fulfilled. Mazelda called out, standing in the front, and the other Shadrakians followed in unison. Experiencing an illusion of feeling like the wind had blown, filling up the area, Subaru made sure to return their spirit with a, yeah, along with a smiling face. Subaru, thank you, everyone. Take care of yourselves and stay happy. As soon as he had said it, he realized that was a greeting terribly filled with deceit. Thinking about the turbulent path that awaited the tribe after this, stay happy were two words that sounded far too hollow and meaningless. However, he could not say anything more than that. He could not wish for anything more than that. He hoped for the pleasant, refreshing women to stay happy as they continued to live their lives. Subaru. While wishing for that, Subaru searched for the man with the wicked mask among the line of people who had come to see his group off. However, it was only natural that the man could not be found anywhere. He was not someone who would send them off, nor did the relationship between him and Subaru involve something like that. Even if Subaru were to spot the man, he would not have any words to tell him. That was why. Subaru, we're heading off. Louis, you. As Subaru said that, almost in a desperate way, Louis's loud voice overlapped with his words. And then, Subaru and his group split themselves from the people of Shudrak, departing for Garel, the nearest town, in an effort to escape from the war that would take place hereafter, taking their first step in doing so. End of chapters 13 and 14, as immortal.